was telling me that within hours of him promoting this event, they were all sold. And it's just great that so many people want to come and see KES on a bigger screen than their TV screen, because the bigger the screen, the more, I think, it affects and moves you. And it's really wonderful that through a chap called Ronnie Steele, who was the chairman of the Barry Hines Memorial Statue, and a friend of mine called Fletch, and Rob, the manager here, that they were able to kind of facilitate this particular showing of probably one of the only existing copies of the 35mm celluloid. It came in 7 cans, right? So it's a really special occasion. But before I tell you a little bit about the film, I'd really like to kind of take a moment and pay tribute to all of those who aren't with us anymore. And there's quite a few from the main cast, and 2 or 3 that I now know about from my school chums who didn't make it. Well, of course, could I not start with the man himself, Barry Hines, who, without his genius and his determination to tell the story of about a young kid who was going to be looked upon as coal mining fodder or factory fodder, wanted to actually shine a light that was outside of the dark clouds of where we were at in the 1960s. So Barry is no longer with us, bless him. Brian Glover, of course, is no longer with us, bless him. I saw him just before he died. He was a wonderful man. It was the year that Barnsley went up to the Premier League. Other people, Colin Welland is another chap who's no longer with us. I attended his funeral, and it was really nice to be among his family and friends. And KES was a big highlight in his life. There's Lynn Perry, who's no longer with us, and her brother, who played the milkman, Dougie Brown, another 2. Bill Dean, who was the fish and chip owner, he's no longer with us. Bernard Ather, who's the youth employment officer, Bernard passed away. Bob Bowes, the headmaster, and I do remember the occasional time when he would do a few practice swings. And who else is there on that list? And then I know of a few school chums. Little gingerhead Desmond Guthrie, who I remember so warmly. I tried to put a documentary together with 7 days' notice, and it was virtually impossible. And I was able to contact Des, but he was very, very ill. He had an incurable brain disease, and his wife said to me he would love to be with all your old schoolmates for one last time, but he's just not well enough. And we shot this documentary that was just impossible to do within 2 hours, and he came on that day in a wheelchair just to say hello to all of his friends, who he knew that this would probably be the last time. So Des is no longer with us. George Speed, who was in the class with me, sitting, I think he sits behind you in the classroom. George is no longer with us. And also I just discovered today that the young boy who played Tibbet, who's the one who gets sent off in the football match, she sadly passed away quite recently too. And also someone who was very close to me when he was with us, who really was kind of taking a back seat in all of this, and that was Tony Garnett, who was the producer. Because without Tony and without Ken, we wouldn't be sitting here now. So let me tell you a little bit about the movie. Barry Hines, as you probably know, wrote a book before The Kiss for a Name called The Blinder, which was kind of based on a George Best of his time in the mid-1960s, who had genius in his feet. And owing to the fact that fame kind of twisted his head and he got a little bit too big for his his career went downhill, and Ken Loach and Tony Garnett read this book because they had started doing movies for the Wednesday play on the BBC, which were actually televised live. They weren't recorded in those days. And they came across this book that Barry had written called The Blinder, contacted him. Remember, he's a first-time writer. Contacted him and said, Barry, we'd really like to make a film of your book called The Blinder. And Barry said to them, he said, I'm not really interested in The Blinder being made. He said, most first-time writers would have begged them to actually make a movie of a book of theirs. But he said, no, I'm not too bothered about The Blinder being made. But I'm writing a book now that I really like. And Ken and Tony said to him, well, what's the story about? And Barry said to him, well, it's about a young kid who's bullied at home, he's bullied at school, he hates school, but he's found a rainbow in his life through the form of a relationship with a bird of prey, a kestrel. And Tony Garnett and Ken Loach thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. Well, would you mind sending us a manuscript when you're ready to publish it? Several weeks later, Barry sent him the manuscript. Ken and Tony read it, and they actually liked it far better than The Blinder. And so within weeks of the book being published in 1968, Tony Garnett and Ken Loach and their backroom staff started setting and getting the funding to actually make this film. We came on the scene in May, July, the casting of it. But I don't want to talk about that maybe later. We almost didn't make the film because one of the American backers decided to drop out. It was a film that was made for under £170,000, which compared to today's prices is, the amount that they spend on promoting a film these days. A big blockbuster, they'd spend £170,000 just promoting it. But we made KES on less than £170,000. But just before we were about to start shooting, the American backer decided to pull out, and we were very lucky because there was a good friend of Tony's and Ken's who was associated with Woodfall Films, who kind of stepped in and replaced the money that we were short. We filmed it in 8 weeks. I was slightly over because I was doing extras, climbing the wall, but most of our school chums went through the entire summer having a ball at school, and I'm sure most of the cast will tell you they had a fantastic time. The film then was then edited, and after editing it was shown to the distributors, who were at the time United Artists, and when they saw it they hated the ending. They really just didn't think it would appeal to anybody. They wanted Billy to actually work in a zoo, or maybe Whipslade or Nares, but I don't know. And they said they'd have enjoyed the movie if it had been dubbed in Hungarian, because they couldn't understand it. I don't know. So they didn't want to release it, and it was put on the back burner. And Ken and Tony had been waiting for 9, 10 months to actually get it out to the public, and they just wouldn't release it. So they decided to go the film circuit and show it as a guest film at various film festivals in Europe and in America. On one of the film festivals that they showed it at, it was in competition in Czechoslovakia, and it won the Golden Bear, which is their top prize, at Carlo Vivari. They showed it at a couple of other festivals, and the reports that they were getting back were so favourable that the Cannes Film Festival, which is supposedly the film festival on the planet, like the Oscars in Europe. But we couldn't be in competition. The film was going to be as a kind of an extra for the press to see during the lunchtime. Well, many of the press went to see it during the lunchtime, and they were so outraged that the film was not in the competition proper, because to a man and woman, every person thought it would have won the Palme d'Or, which is the penultimate, well, it's the ultimate prize you could win in movie making. So in actual fact, Ken Loach, the director of KES, he would have won 3 Palme d'Ors, which no one has ever done on this planet. Well, the distributors now had started to kind of hear that the movie was starting to take track, and they decided to show it at the London Film Festival in November of 1969. That was the first place I saw it, with Colin Welland, Barry Hines, Tony Garnett, and Ken was there too. We sat at the back and watched it, and there was complete hush, laughter where we wanted it, and as the curtain came down and the end credits rolled, to a man and woman, every person in the auditorium, 1,000 people stood up for 15 minutes and applauded, and they just never stopped. It was just amazing. The distributors now thought, well, what we'll do, we'll just show it up the north. They won't want to see it down south. So they decided to have the world premiere in Doncaster, not in Barnsley. It should have been in Barnsley, the ABC. And it did incredibly well. And a week later, it came to the ABC in Barnsley. And from there on in, every northern town, Sheffield, Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, Newcastle, everywhere it went, it was breaking box office and attendance records. I did attend many of these kind of screenings, and they were chocker around the block. So the fact that we're here 55 years later since we made that movie, and that we still feel so powerfully connected to it, not only in our personal lives and the memories that we have, but also in how it reflects in society today. We're still having to deal with the same problems. It tells you how important that this movie has become. And thanks to Ronnie Steele for collecting the funds to be able to create a statue in town to Barry Hines. This movie will never go away. It will always inspire the next generations to come. So I can see Rob is kind of getting a little bit